Hi lovelies! Welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Maria and today's video is going to be my June reading wrap up. So just going through all the books I read in June, giving you my thoughts and feelings on them, if I recommend them, star ratings and all that good stuff. I feel like I had a pretty good reading month in June. I ended up reading 14 books, which is higher than average for me. I think I usually average at around 10 to 12 books. So the past couple of months I've ended up reading 14, but I have had a few shorter reads in there as well. So in terms of page count, it's probably working out roughly the same. But I did have a good variation of genres in here this month as well, because I had a little bit of fantasy, I had a little bit of romance, some middle grade in there as well because of a reading group that I have, and then also had a thriller as well because again my in real life book club, the book pick that we had was a thriller. So all in all, a pretty varied month. I didn't quite manage to get to all of my TBR because basically there were quite a few new releases that came out that I completely forgot about. I forgot they were coming out, and I also had a few arcs that I needed to read for them coming out as well. So that kind of sidetracked me a little bit, but I did get most of it read. I think I only ended up with 2 books off my TBR that I didn't read. So considering all of the books that were coming out, I'm pretty happy with that. Pretty happy that I managed to get most of my TBR read. But yeah, I think with all that out of the way, let's just get into the roundup and go through all the books I read in June. Okay, so the first book I finished in June is Mariana Zapata's All Roads Lead Here, and this one we're following a woman who has basically just recently been divorced. She was having a bit of a troubled time anyway and ends up going back to her hometown to try and reconnect with herself. Essentially her mum passed when she was quite young and she remembers her mum always taking hikes and really loving nature, and she decides to go back to her hometown in order to do that and, as I say, to try and reconnect with herself. Now when she gets there, she thinks she's renting a room from Mr. Rhodes, but it turns out his teenage son has actually rented out the room to her without his father's knowledge. And initially he doesn't really want her staying there, but he ends up giving in and letting her rent the room above the garage, and the story kind of goes from there. One of the main things I really liked about this one is it's definitely slow burn. I'd heard that Mariana Zapata is the queen of slow burn, and I truly think reading this one I can attest to that. I think we were probably at like this point before the romance really started happening, but we did see it build and build quietly throughout the story. I really liked that both characters kind of had a life outside the relationship. The relationship wasn't saving them from anything. They weren't kind of looking for a distraction or anything. They were very much just working on themselves or had their own things going on, but the relationship was kind of an added bonus for them, and it was just really refreshing to read that. Again, these are older characters as well, so different stages of their life than most romances that you would read. So yeah, again for me it was just a really refreshing take on that, and it was pretty funny. I really liked the main character's inner monologue and kind of the little jokes she would make with herself. I thought it was really funny, and I actually found her pretty relatable as well, and I found it quite inspiring how she managed to kind of pick herself up after a lot of the things that she was going through as well. There was also a father-son dynamic in there because the main male interest in here is a single dad, and again there was quite an interesting family dynamic with him and his ex-partner and kind of why he has this child in his life, and I just thought it was really approached with care, and again it was just refreshing to not have kind of the standard within here. And yeah, even though it was quite long, it didn't feel like that when I was reading it, and I just think it's a really good romance with depth and has some heart in there with a good bit of humour mixed in. And yeah, I would highly recommend it. I did rate it 4 stars just because even though I do mention it didn't feel like that long reading it, there were a few bits in there that were a little bit repetitive and a little bit draggy, but overall I really enjoyed my time in this one and be really interested to read more from Mariana Zapata. Then next up was my book pick for Tulips and Tales, so my Fable book club. We ended up picking The Courting of Bristol Keats for our first read together, and just want to say that that was really fun. I really enjoyed kind of the interactions with everyone as we went through the read. Really happy that quite a lot of people ended up interacting and kind of chatting about the chapters and the book and the story and the narrative, and yeah, I just think for our first book it was really fun, and I'm really happy that this book did give us plenty to talk about. If you did want to join, I will put the link for the Fable book club in the description, and the book that we're reading for July is Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher, and you'll have plenty of time to read it. I give the whole month, you know, to read it. There's no schedule or anything. You just have the month to read it and just put in your comments as and when you read it, as it's all separated by chapters. So yeah, definitely check that out if you want to join us for this month. But as I say, this was our first pick, and unfortunately, this was a little bit disappointing for me. I was really highly anticipating this one. The premise of it is basically we have this girl whose parents died when she was quite young. She's been kind of managing with her and her sisters for quite some time. And one day she gets a letter from a mysterious aunt who basically says that she has something for them that will help them out in terms of money. And at first she's quite dubious, but she ends up going to visit this aunt, and essentially she ends up enthralled with the Lord of the Fae, and he actually says that her parents may not be dead and he may be able to help her find them. So the story kind of goes from there. She ends up kind of embroiled in this court kind of almost trial like environment within the Fae realm, and even though I do think the writing was quite lush and beautiful, and I do think that the atmosphere that was built up in this was quite well done, I do think that by kind of the second third of it I was losing interest a little bit because it felt a little bit insta-love to me. There is a romantic element in here, it is a romantasy, and I just felt like it came on so quickly and out of nowhere. You know, there was no build up and all of a sudden they were deeply in love with each other, so it did kind of take my enjoyment away from the rest of the book. And I do also think that the trial elements in here were one of the more compelling sides of it, and we just didn't get enough of that. I don't feel like we got enough of the side characters in here either to give me a full picture of who they are. You know, I'd be reading from one of their perspectives and I wouldn't know which side character I was reading from until a good few paragraphs in, because it didn't feel like they had their own voice. But other than that, I do think it was pretty entertaining for the most part. Wasn't really fussed on the ending of it, but I may still read the second one to see where the story goes. But while I don't think it was a poorly written book or anything like that, I think objectively it's a well written book. I did like the writing style in here. The plot line in the story just was really lacking for me, and I just didn't feel connected to the characters when I was reading this one, unfortunately. But because of the writing style and because of the world building and everything like that, I still gave this one 3.5 stars, but in terms of my enjoyment, it definitely wasn't a favourite for me. And then next up we had The Burning Girls by C.J. Tudor, and this was my in real life book club pick. And I'm not really a huge thriller reader, and not because I don't think I would enjoy them, it's just that sometimes when I'm reading thrillers I tend to guess the twist really easily for some reason. I don't know why, because I'm definitely not a mastermind in any way, but for some reason I guess it really quickly and I always think, oh, that couldn't be the twist, that's too easy, I've guessed it really early, and it always ends up happening. And unfortunately it happened with this one as well. But to give you a bit of a background on this one, we're following a woman who moves to a small town in England, kind of in the countryside, and she's the new vicar of this town. She's basically been forced to move here by her diocese, I think they're called, and is trying to make the most of it when she gets there. Now, when they move into this new house, she does have a daughter with her who is around 14, and when they move in, there's just a few spooky things that are happening. There's a scene right at the start where they kind of get spooked as soon as they arrive, and I don't want to give too many details because it may give away spoilers, but essentially it's a bit of a creepy town. If you're in the UK, you may have watched Midsummer Murders. It's kind of that vibe, where it's kind of a very mysterious small town. Everyone seems to know each other, but there's quite a few kind of creepy characters in there. So essentially there's a bit of a mystery going on here about these missing girls, and there's a bit of lore around the town about these two girls who went missing and people haven't heard from them since. So people are trying to figure out what happened to them, you know, where they went, if there was any connection to some of the fires that have been in the town, and the story goes from there. But with this one, as I say, it was just very predictable to me. I didn't feel like any of the twists were that twisty, to be honest. I think it was very obvious from the outset what was going to happen, kind of where the twist was going to be. There was also kind of a side plot line that we were following from a different perspective that when it got to the end of the story, we really didn't need it. It was absolutely unnecessary for the story, apart from kind of one scene that person was in, and it didn't really have an impact on the story at all. But yeah, unfortunately it wasn't for me. I feel like if you're big into thrillers, it may have been predictable to you as well, but maybe it's just a weird thing I have that for some reason I pick up on little details that they're putting in there as foreshadowing. Maybe I'm picking up on that. I mean, I don't usually with fantasy or anything like that, but for some reason with thrillers there'll be like a detail and I'll be like, interesting that they would mention that. What does that mean? How is that kind of impacting the story? So just a weird thing with thrillers. I tend to guess the twists really quickly and it kind of takes the enjoyment out of it. Unless it's a really well done one and I'm still interested in how it's done, it tends to take the enjoyment out of it a little bit, because that's kind of the point of a thriller. So for this one I ended up rating it 3 stars. A lot of the people in my group did actually rate it quite similarly, if not lower, so I don't think I'm alone in that. I do think that even though thrillers aren't my main genre, a lot of the people in my in real life book club do like thrillers and they kind of rated it similarly, so do with that what you will. Okay, and then next up I ended up reading A Monsoon Rising by Thea Guanzon, and this is the second book in the Hurricane Wars series. So I read the Hurricane Wars last month and surprisingly really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure what to expect because it was really hyped when it came out. A lot of people were saying, you know, it was the biggest new romantasy, and sometimes that makes me a little bit apprehensive when something's really popular really quickly, especially in the era of kind of TikTok where things just become widely popular in such a short amount of time. And another thing that was kind of putting me off this one is a lot of people say that it's Star Wars fanfic. I haven't watched Star Wars, I know nothing about it, so wasn't sure if that was going to be a good thing or a bad thing going into this. Was I going to have some prior knowledge going into this and understanding the world? But for me personally, I did find the world really intriguing. I can't say if it was unique, because if it's just kind of copying Star Wars, I don't know how unique it is, but it felt unique to me anyway. And essentially in the first book we've got 2 characters who are kind of the leaders of their relative kingdoms, and the kingdoms have been at war for quite some time, and the only way that they can kind of think of bringing the kingdoms together and to broker peace is for these two to have a arranged marriage. So there's kind of a forced proximity there, marriage of convenience, but there was quite a lot of political machinations in there in terms of the kingdoms, how they're moving, how people are kind of maneuvering the main characters to get the ends that they're looking for. So I think there was plenty of plot there to keep you interested if you're not so interested in the romance. And I did actually find it quite a slow burn as well. You could definitely feel the tension building between them because there is that kind of enemies to lovers, and I would say that this is more true to enemies to lovers because of their warring kingdoms, and they've literally been at war with each other within the book. So there's so many elements that I really enjoyed within that first book, so I really wanted to read the second book before I forgot a lot of the details in there, so decided to pick this one up this month. And I've definitely said that the second book is a lot slower paced, but because we're getting a lot less world building than the first book, I feel like we really got the character arcs within here and we learned a lot more about them. The relationships were deepening within the first half of this book, and I really just loved watching their dynamic kind of grow as they had that time to kind of slow down and decompress from some of the events within the first book. It did feel at times like some of the first half of the book was a little bit of filler, but I do think it's a second book syndrome. There is going to be a little bit of filler in there just to kind of buffer between some of the action that happens at the end. And true to fantasy/romantasy form, the last 100 pages were really action packed, and I really need to read the third book ASAP. With the way that the second book ended, I need to get the third book in my hands because that was a pretty good ending and a pretty good twist as well. So yeah, just because there was a few of those filler moments in the first half of the book, I ended up rating this one 4.25, but I absolutely flew through it. It was really addictive, really bingeable, and I'd definitely say if you're a fan of romantasy and you haven't picked this series up yet, definitely pick it up. I do think that it hits all of those things that we love in terms of tropes, but it also does it really well. You know, they're not just tropes for the sake of being tropes. I do think they fit into the narrative really well, and yeah, it's just really well done, really nice writing style, and really looking forward to book 3 in this series. Okay, and then next up is one of the new releases. So it was Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I'm actually a really big fan of Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I never really mention her as one of my top favourites, but most of the books that I've read by her have been really enjoyable and usually above 4 stars. So I do really like her writing style. So when I seen this book was coming out, I was really looking forward to it. A little bit apprehensive because of the themes of this. Obviously it's set around NASA and space, and if you haven't guessed, because as I say, I've never watched Star Wars, space and that type of thing just aren't usually my type of thing. It's not something I kind of seek out in my entertainment, but was really intrigued by this because it is written by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and just some of the themes, as I say, that I knew it would be exploring. I really wanted to see her take on it. And in this one we're following Joan Goodwin, who is kind of taking part in this astronaut training academy and getting her ready to be able to one day hopefully join in on a mission to space. And I don't want to give too many details about this because, and especially some of the themes, because I think it's kind of a little bit spoilery, but what I will say is that this book definitely made me feel every emotion fathomable under the sun within quite a short space, because it's only like 350 pages or something like that, and it definitely made me feel joy, it made me feel sadness, it made me feel apprehension, and yeah, just some really visceral reactions to some of the things and some of the themes that were happening in here. I definitely think it focuses more on kind of the team who are training to become astronauts rather than the NASA side of things itself. I do think that there was quite a lot of information in here about kind of what it takes to become an astronaut, which really impressed me. I can't say if it's factual or not because I have no idea, but it felt like it was really well researched. So if we have any astronauts on the channel, definitely put in the comments if you think it was factual, but it just felt like it was really well researched, so it felt believable, even if it is all, you know, made up. And I do think that while this is obviously, it's called Atmosphere, a love story, there is a love story at the heart of this. I came away feeling very inspired, emboldened, and just really proud of kind of how the female perseverance was portrayed in here, and kind of how amazing we as women can be, despite all of the things in society that may be trying to push us back in our box. And this is set in the 80s, so obviously there's a few things in here that we're maybe not facing so much these days, but sadly there's quite a few things in here that we do still face. So I really love the way kind of the female strength was portrayed in here, that it wasn't just portrayed in one certain way. It was kind of explored through a few of the different female characters in here, so really loved that. And as I say, in terms of emotions, there was definitely a bit at the ending here where I don't think I'll ever forgive Taylor Jenkins Reid for, but it just goes to show how much she kind of got me invested within these characters and how much I was really rooting for them the whole way through. So yeah, really enjoyed this one. I did end up rating a 4.5 stars, only because it just didn't feel like a 5-star, and I can't really put my finger on why. All in all, a really good read. I think if you like contemporary fiction, you'll definitely really enjoy this. If you like Taylor Jenkins Reid, you'll enjoy this, and yeah, just highly recommend this one. Okay, so the next book that I read is Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, and I actually read the second book in this series this month as well, so I'll talk about them together. But basically I have a couple of friends who I do a few buddy reads with, Selin and Madison, and we decided to read this series together together because none of us read it when we were children, so we wanted to get over the FOMO, we wanted to understand why everyone loved this series, so decided to read it together just for a bit of fun. And I have to say I have really enjoyed it up until now. I'm not really someone who reaches out for middle grade books that often, but I am really enjoying this one, especially because it's kind of centered around a lot of Greek mythology, so it's just exploring it in a really fun way. I have read obviously quite a few serious Greek mythology retellings, but because this is for middle grade age, it's just doing it in a really fun way, and just seeing some of the snippets of some of the lore that I really enjoy within those books has been really, really fun. Really love the first book in terms of the setup and in terms of kind of the dynamic between some of the characters that were in there. It's pretty hard to kind of critique a children's book at the age that I am now, but in terms of my enjoyment, I would definitely say I enjoyed the first one better than the second one. The second one had a few weird storylines in there, and the characters were kind of separated for a lot of it, so I think we were missing kind of that found family dynamic that you get in the first book with Percy and some of the characters that he meets along the way. But yeah, overall just really enjoying my experience reading those ones. They're just a bit of a fun read in between some more serious reads. It definitely makes me realise I should maybe look out for some of the other middle grades that I missed out on when I was younger, because they're definitely good palate cleansers for in between reads. But yeah, as I say, really enjoying the experience. The first book I rated 4 stars, the second one I rated 3.5, and we're just about to read the third book as well, so you'll probably see that in next month's wrap up. Okay, so next up was one of my arcs, and it was My Friends by Frederick Backman, and this book is now out, but at the time when I was reading it, it was just about to come out. And speaking of books that made me emotional, this is definitely one of those that made me feel so many emotions while I was reading it. Within this one, we're following Louisa, who is a young girl who has kind of had a troubled upbringing. She's just about to turn 18, and she's kind of biding her time until that day so that she can just run her own life and she doesn't have to go back to the foster home that she's been living in. She ends up coming across this artist who is quite poorly but painted one of her absolute favourite paintings, and he ends up basically introducing her to someone who can tell her the story about the background of the painting that he painted that has kind of 3 young children in it. And the story is really just us getting to hear that story through Louisa's perspective and kind of going through the memories of this artist and his friends when he was younger. And I would say it was definitely a lot slower paced than some of the other Frederick Backman books that I've read. He is very much a character study author, but with this one it was really about that character study. It was very much about the friendships that we build when we're young, how they impact us in our adult life, and it really was just an exploration of the characters that we were following. But I found it really deeply moving. It was very contemplative. It really made me feel nostalgic for some of the times I've had with my friends when I was younger, and it had his signature blend of kind of warmth, wit and emotional gut punches along the way. I felt like the characters felt incredibly real. I really felt like I would know these people in real life, and because of that, as always with Frederick Backman, it got me so invested in their stories. It got me so emotional about them. I've definitely said to check out some trigger warnings for this one because some of the themes were incredibly dark in here, but really at the core of it, showing how kind of the endurance that these children displayed when they were young and kind of the strength that they got from their friendships, even if they were in a pretty terrible situation, really pulled them through some of the hardest times of their lives. And yeah, just overall I just really, really loved it. It definitely made me feel a lot of emotions. There was parts of it where I'm not really a big crier at books, but there was definitely a lump in my throat when I was coming towards the end. And yeah, just really, really glad that I've read it. And I would say if you like Frederick Backman, if you like anything that's a lot more character driven, you'll probably enjoy this one as well. It was a little bit slow at times, and again it did feel a little bit repetitive in terms of we were hearing the story but we were maybe hearing some of the story from different perspectives as we were going through, so it did impact the pacing a little bit. So I ended up rating this one 4.5 as well, but I mean 4.5 is still a really, really good rating. So as I say, if you really like Frederick Backman, or if you like anything that's very character driven, a little bit slice of life, a little bit kind of chaotic in there as well, you'll definitely enjoy this one. It was really beautifully written, and yeah, definitely got me in the feels a little bit. Next up was another arc that I buddy read with my friend Clara, and that was The Kiss of Dusk. No, I get this wrong every time. The Fallen and the Kiss of Dusk by Carissa Broadbent. And this is the 4th book kind of in the overall Crowns of Nyaxia series, but the 2nd book in the duology following a certain amount of characters. So I can't give you too much of the synopsis of this one, but within this series we're kind of following vampire lore. We've got trials within the first book. It's very dark, very atmospheric, and really, really good romantasy if you do enjoy romantasy. The romance is kind of at the core of it, but again there's quite a good world that she's building here. It's centered around vampires and kind of their connection to certain gods within this world, so a lot of political machinations going on there as well. And Carissa Broadbent's writing is just amazing, so highly recommend the series overall. But for this book I wasn't sure what to expect, because in the first book of this duology for these characters it was quite slow paced for the first part of it, and I know that that was a complaint for quite a lot of people who read it. They were not really happy with the pacing in the first one, but the 2nd book was definitely very fast paced. It just felt like, you know, it was issue after issue after issue. There was always something happening. I definitely felt like the characters were in peril for most of the time. I really wasn't sure what was going to happen, because if you've read Carissa Broadbent, you'll know she's not afraid to hurt her characters, and yeah, I was afraid for them for some time. I think the world building got even deeper than we've kind of got within the first 3 books within this series. We really got to explore some of the other gods that have been mentioned and kind of the dynamic between the gods as well. So I really loved that kind of deeper exploration that we got there. Then of course, because it's the 4th book in a series, we got reunited with some familiar faces that are within that world. So if you really love it and you've read kind of all the books within the world, it was definitely one of those kind of moments that got you a little bit giddy because you're seeing those familiar characters. So yeah, really loved this one. Again, ended up rating this one 4.5. Wasn't quite a 5-star, but I definitely think I enjoyed this one more than I enjoyed the first book in the duology. And in terms of the romantic relationship, again, it was pretty slow burn and it just felt really real for me as well. So yeah, highly recommend this one as well. So we're basically getting all my favourite reads out in these last few, but basically the next book I read was Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab, and let me just say I absolutely adored this book. We're following 3 characters in here in 3 different timelines. So 3 women, one is in the 1500s, one is in the early 1800s, and one is in 2019. And essentially they're all at a point in their life where they need change, they want to take control of their own fate, they don't want to be told what to do anymore. And even though obviously they're all in very different timelines, their lives are very much echoing each other through the ages, and it was just really interesting to kind of see how their storylines ended up converging. V.E. Schwab's writing, as always, was really lyrical, really beautiful. This is definitely more character focused than plot focused, I would say. If you've read Addie LaRue, you probably will enjoy the pacing of this one if you enjoyed that one, because it's very much vibes over plot, you know, more about the characters in here, kind of their morality and kind of immorality, I suppose, as the book goes on for certain characters, and kind of how that can make you change as a human or whatever else you may become, because obviously this is a vampire book. But yeah, I just think if you go in expecting it to be slower paced and a bit more on the level with Addie LaRue, I think you will enjoy this one because the character development in here was perfect. I really loved that the characters weren't always perfect, they weren't always likeable, because that isn't life, you know, that's not going to be a true representation of who these women were. But even though I didn't think the characters were likeable, I was still rooting for some of them, even though they were doing things that I really didn't agree with. I still found myself rooting for them because of some of the history that they had, and while I didn't agree, I could see where they were coming from. So really loved the writing style in this one, really loved the characters, and yeah, I think if V.E. Schwab writes our shopping list, I'm probably going to read it, and if you can't tell already, ended up rating this one 5 stars. Okay, and then next up, I did need a little bit of a palate cleanser after reading some of those highly emotional reads, and I ended up picking up Fantasma by Kaylee Smith because I did have the audiobook for this one, and I'm actually really surprised at how much I like this one. I'd seen some mixed reviews, seen some reviews from mutuals of mine who usually have a pretty similar taste to me, who didn't necessarily hate it but didn't necessarily love it either, but I actually really enjoyed this. I thought it was really fun. We're following a character who basically at the start of this, her sister goes missing and she kind of decides that she's going to go and try and find her, and all clues are leading to this kind of phantasma which comes to the town every however many years, and you can actually participate in this to get a wish of your asking, and it's kind of similar to Caraval in that way if you've read that book, but just give it a bit of a gothic and darker twist. So basically our main character Ophelia goes in here to try and find her sister, and the story goes from there. This is a bit of a romantasy. This is quite spicy. I would say this is higher on the spice radar than I usually would read, but I don't think it took away from the story at all. So if you're not into spice, you could probably skim those scenes. They weren't really adding to the story, but they didn't take away from it for me either. But just a warning that this is a pretty spicy one. But yeah, I just really enjoyed this one because there were trials in here and I just thought they were done really well. It is a trope that's used quite often, but if it's done really well, I still really enjoy it. I really liked our main character. I really liked being in her head. I felt like she was definitely vulnerable at times, but you could definitely see her strength coming through. There was really good representation in here for OCD as well, and it was actually done pretty accurately in terms of the way that it's depicted, as our main character actually suffers with it as well. So I thought that was an interesting addition to this one, and from reading the author's note, it seems to be kind of something that is quite personal to her, so I really loved that that was added in here. But yeah, I just think overall it was a really fun read, really solid romantasy. Definitely excited to read the second one. I have heard that they're quite similar, so I'll probably leave a bit of space between reading this first one and reading the second one, but pleasantly surprised that I did enjoy this one so much and ended up rating this one 4 stars. Okay, so next up I had an arc by Julie Soto, and it was Rose in Chains. Now this one I believe started out as a Dramoni fanfic, so a lot of people have been hyping it because of that. Quite honestly, I'm not sure if I just don't know enough about the Harry Potter lore, but if I didn't know that, I wouldn't have really seen any pointers to that within the narrative. We're kind of living in this dystopian world where there's been these 2 kingdoms who have been fighting with each other for quite some time. One of the kingdoms thinks they're obviously better than the other side, and they end up winning the war, and essentially what happens is the women or magic wielders who have any amount of power from that rival kingdom end up getting taken and kind of used as almost boosters for the other kingdoms for their magic, totally against their will. So they're essentially being held as slaves, and we've got our main character who has known the character who ends up being her kind of holder for quite some time. They went to school together, and the story kind of goes from there. It's just kind of watching her go through this, not really understanding what's happening, not really knowing who she can trust. And they did say that this would be pretty dark, and I would say that the first 30% of it was incredibly dark. It's very dystopian in terms of the themes in there. I would say if you've ever read The Handmaid's Tale or watched the series or anything, it kind of gave the same feeling to that. I do think that that's kind of where a lot of the inspiration was taken from. So yeah, another one you need to get trigger warnings for before jumping in. So I did expect it to be a dark romantasy, and I'd say that's exactly what I got. I'd say it was pretty intense the whole way through, but it has a lot of tropes that most people enjoy. So enemies to lovers, morally grey characters, and a pretty lush fantasy world that's definitely very cruel and dark, but I do feel like it was pretty well developed. And as I say, if I didn't really know that it was kind of taken from Harry Potter fan fiction, I wouldn't have really connected anything, but maybe that's just my brain doesn't work that way. I would say that within this one the timeline jumps a little bit, and I know some people don't like that where it jumps back to the past to kind of show you why these characters have a bit of a relationship from their school days, and then it comes to kind of modern day where they're trying to work out what's going to happen. But I do think it was necessary to add more weight to the interactions that they were having, because at first I wasn't really buying it, but the more that you kind of learned about their past interactions, it made more sense. So sometimes I like that, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just prefer for it to be kind of chronological, or just for there to be a couple of chapters of background building and then we understand the dynamic, because otherwise it did feel a little bit disingenuous at the start until you got that depth. So it just meant that a few things didn't land for me emotionally, and meant I wasn't truly invested for some part of the story. But by the end I did really get invested. I did enjoy it. I did like the characters, and I'd be interested to see where the story goes after this, given the ending of this first book. There were a few twists in there that maybe didn't necessarily make sense to me in terms of the run up to them, but again, I'm intrigued to see how they play out in the next book, and ended up rating this one 4 stars because of that, just because there were a few things that didn't really land right with me. But overall I think it was well written. I did enjoy my time in the story. Not really too fussed on the romantic relationship, to be honest, but I'd be interested to see where politically the story goes when we get into this second book. And as I say, the way that the first book ended off, there was quite an interesting twist there, so I'd be interested to see how that plays out in the second book. Okay, and then next up I need to talk about a book that has emotionally drained me since I've read it, and that is Parable of the Soore by Octavia E. Butler. This is a story that most people will have heard about. It is a dystopian novel. It was written in the early 1900s, and it's kind of a depiction of what Octavia E. Butler predicted our world might be like in 2024, 2025, 2026, so optimum time to be reading this one. And within this one we're following Lauren, who is a young girl. She's around 15 when the book starts, living in a society that has basically almost like a post-apocalyptic feel. There hasn't been a big bang issue that has happened. It's essentially just from kind of climate change, poverty, desperation, there's kind of pushed society against each other, and there's very much an us and them feeling. Lauren is part of a family that isn't necessarily rich, but definitely not poor. They're probably what you would consider working class, and they live in a walled community because they have to for their safety, and they have to ensure that it's locked so that the kind of poor people essentially can't come in and steal from them or damage their property or anything. Essentially, as the story goes along, Lauren ends up having to flee her community, and she takes kind of a few people with her along the way. We really get to see what this post-apocalyptic feeling world looks like outside there, and what's really scary about this is that it doesn't feel like it's too far removed from our reality or something that could happen. You know, a lot of the nuance in here is very indicative of things that are happening in the world today. So it was pretty eerie reading this, and especially because it's set kind of in and around now, and with some of the things that have happened in the last year or so within the world, this is definitely a really eerie time to be reading this one. So I think that's why it's had quite a huge emotional toll on me. But throughout this, Lauren is definitely trying to find kind of a bit of hope within this world. She's trying to kind of come up with this new ideology to try and bring humanity back together again. And I did enjoy that. I did enjoy kind of her search for hope throughout that, but I do think that at times it did become a little bit preachy and a little bit repetitive. So while I found it insightful at times, at other times it just kind of felt like we're rehashing old ground here. It wasn't really bringing anything new to the story, but I was still really rooting for Lauren the entire way through. I just wanted people to listen to her. She was speaking a lot of sense, and I got really invested in her character as well. But again, I would say with this one, definitely check out your trigger warnings. This is incredibly dark. This is not sugarcoating anything. There's a lot of things in here that will trigger multiple people. I'm still kind of thinking about it and decompressing from it maybe 3 days later from reading this one. And while I would say that I recommend this book and it was well written, I didn't necessarily enjoy my time reading this. I felt like I was grimacing while I was reading it, but I do think it was an incredibly important book and definitely well worth the read if you're in the right mental capacity for it. So Ended up rating this one 4.5 just because, as I say, some of it did get a little bit repetitive and preachy, and there was a certain storyline at the end that I just didn't think was necessary for where the story was going or to get the messaging across. But other than that, I think this was a really well written book, and to get such a visceral reaction from me, yeah, I can't really give it anything less than that. And then after that, in order to kind of take me out of my depressive stupor from reading Parable of the Soore, I ended up picking up Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton, and this is a non-fiction, but it's basically Dolly Alderton's memoir, going through her life from her teens up until her 20s and talking about all her friendships and all of her love life and everything like that that we go through within those ages. And I really, really love this one. I actually looked up Dolly Alderton as I started reading this one because a lot of the pop culture that she was referencing is exactly the same that I experienced. So she was actually born in the same year as me, a couple of months apart, so it makes a lot of sense as to why I was getting that reaction from this. And it just felt really nostalgic in terms of some of the things she was exploring, some of the things that we used to be interested in around that age range, and I feel like the way that she was describing it was just really funny. But I think at the core of this book, essentially, she's just trying to navigate kind of the feelings that you have around that age, around love, whether it's with your romantic relationships, with your friendships, with your family, or whoever it may be, and kind of just saying that, you know, people hit different milestones at different times within their life. Don't feel like you're kind of lagging behind just because you're not hitting it at the same time as other people. And yeah, I just thought it was a really fun read. As I said, it really helped me decompress from reading Parable of the Soore. I really liked her humour within here. I definitely think it's not going to be representative of everyone's teens and 20s. I think she's obviously quite a privileged person, but in terms of my teens and in terms of my 20s, I could definitely identify with a lot of the things that she was going through, a lot of the things that she was feeling. And yeah, just really enjoyed this one, as I say, as a bit of a palate cleanser after reading Parable of the Soore, and ended up rating this one 4 stars. Feels a little bit weird to rate it 4 stars because it is technically a memoir, so I'm not sure should I be rating it 5 stars, but yeah, in terms of my enjoyment, I would probably say it is in and around the 4-star range, so that's what I ended up landing on for this one. And then last up for the month of June, I read A Curse Carved in Bone by Danielle L. Jensen. This is the second book in her A Fate Inked in Blood series, and this just came out a couple of months ago, and I've really been anticipating reading the second book because I really enjoyed the first book. I really like Danielle L. Jensen's romanticises as well. I've read her Bridge Kingdom series, which I absolutely adore, and really enjoyed A Fate Inked in Blood, which is the first book in this series. If you haven't heard of this series, it's kind of based on a lot of Norse mythology, especially around the Shield Maiden, but within the second book, we definitely explored that Norse mythology a little bit more. But in our first book, Freya is the main character, and essentially she's in a quite unhappy marriage. Her husband is quite abusive, and he essentially sells her to this Jarl who has been seeking after anyone who has the blood of the Shield Maiden within them, as he has heard a prophecy that whoever controls her will control the kingdom. And that kind of takes Freya on this journey with him and his cavalry along the way back to his kingdom. And along the way, she ends up catching the eye of his son, and the story goes from there. But what I will say about Danielle L. Jensen's romanticises is, even though it is technically categorised as romantasy, there is always a lot of political machinations going on in the background. There's always a lot of plot there. Generally, there are a few twists as well. She usually does get me, but I will say that this one felt a little bit more predictable to me. There was quite a few things that I did predict before it happened, but at the same time, when it was getting to the very end, the twists had twists. So she still got me in the end with this one. We pick up exactly where we left off in the first book in this one, so really loved kind of exploring that. But the first kind of 30 to 40% of this one did feel a little bit slow, and I didn't find myself fully immersed into it until maybe like the 50 to 60% mark, where I wanted to see what was going to happen with the characters. There's definitely a lot less romance in this second book, so again, if you jump into these looking for kind of that romance heavy romantasy, you might not get it as much with this one as you would be expecting, so just a bit of forewarning on that one. But still really like Danielle L. Jensen's writing. Really glad that I've now finished this duology, but because of that pacing at the start, I ended up rating this one 4 stars overall. But I would definitely still recommend this series if you enjoy Norse mythology, if you enjoy romantasy, and if you're trying to maybe get into a little bit more high fantasy, this would be a good one to start, because there are quite a few political machinations that you need to kind of follow within here, but it's nothing too intricate. The magic system isn't too intricate in here either, so it would definitely be a good starting point if you're trying to jump into this genre. So yeah, that's everything. That's all the books I read in June. As I say, quite a few of them were ARCs and were on my Kindle as well, so it doesn't look as many when I'm holding them together, but 14 books all in all, so really happy with that. Even though some of them were slightly shorter, I'm still pretty happy that I managed to read 14 books in the month. So let me know if you've read any of these, if you've got any of these on your TBR, or let me know what your favourite book in June was as well. I'm always looking for new recommendations, so if there's anything you think I should be reading, definitely put that in the comments below. And if you don't have anything to comment, just put the rocket emoji for atmosphere to let me know that you got to the end. But if you like this video, do remember to give it a like, and if you want to see more from me, remember to subscribe. I post 2 videos per week, and it's videos like this, so wrap-ups, reading vlogs, TBR jars, all good bookish things like that. Other than that, thanks so much for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one soon. Bye!